If you didn't know, Harley Quinn, the animated series, has its 4th season now live at HBO Max. If you haven't been watching the show, it's completely ridiculous, but in a great way, with Poison Ivy as her co-lead and they're in a lesbian relationship. The show includes appearances by Batman and the Joker, Bane, Nightwing, Robin, Batgirl. But to me, what stands out in season 4 is the appearance of probably the most ridiculous character ever created in the DC universe, Snowflame, a supervillain who's powered by cocaine. Did you miss him? Here he is, snorting coke. I may have to say that word 200 times in this video, so to avoid not getting monetized, I'll just give a visual cue. And let me be clear, this character was not created for the animated series. He already existed in the comics. Seriously, I'm not making this up. This character actually existed. This is real. His name really is Snowflame, a supervillain powered by... That's completely insane, so let's face it. The only place he would be welcome is something as ridiculous as the animated series of Harley Quinn. So to me, that's worth the price of admission just to get HBO Max just to watch this. Okay, so let's look at some of the history of Snowflame, shall we? The supervillain powered by... Oh, I can't stop laughing about this. He first appears in the New Guardians #2 from 1988 from DC Comics. He was created by Steve Englehart, who probably was on this when he created this character. He's the leader of a drug cartel, and he actually defeats the New Guardians. And check out this actual dialogue. Challenge accepted. I am Snowflame. Every cell of my being burns with white hot ecstasy. Cocaine is my god, and I am the human instrument of its will. Wow, that's actual dialogue from a comic in 1988. I'm gonna call it right now. Steve Englehart, you were playing with the nose candy, weren't you? Here's our interpretation of Snowflame by a man named Eric Schonborn on Twitter. If you're a supervillain who's powered by, then yeah, you gotta live up to the name. This is a pretty good piece, don't you think? So anywho, he shows up in a comic in 1988, appears to defeat the New Guardians, and then miraculously dies in the explosion in the same issue. So that should have been the end of the story for this campy character, right? Well, not so fast, my friend, because he shows up in Catwoman #23. This is the new 52 edition. And he intentionally looks a lot like Don Johnson on Miami Vice. If you're too young to remember it, it was this show, starring Don Johnson and Philip Michael Thomas, who played narcotics agents and took down the bad guys, but in style. They did a remake of this starring Jamie Foxx and Colin Farrell too. It was okay. He also shows up in issue #24 as well. And I tell you, if I was Don Johnson, I think I would sue. Going back to the New Guardians issue, you may ask yourself, didn't they have a Comics Code Authority back then that clearly should have blocked a comic book character that was powered by this? Well, Johnny, you're right. There was a CCA back then, but DC did not submit this particular issue for review. So, as you can see, it does not have the CCA stamp on it. But let's face it, by the late 80s, the CCA had lost all of its power and credibility, and by January 2011, it was completely abandoned. So ask yourself, what do you think inspired Steve Englehart to create Snowflame? If you were too young to remember or wasn't alive then, the 80s were a very strange era. It was the era of Reagan, junk bonds, hair metal, the rise of rap, the rise of Nike, Michael Jordan, Cabbage Patch Dolls, Michael Jackson before it got weird, Prince when he was weird, Madonna, this, Flashdance, Arnold, Stallone, Rubik's Cubes, Eddie Murphy, synth pop, Mike Tyson knocking everyone the F out, Back to the Future, E.T., John Hughes films, The Cosby Show when we didn't know that everyone's favorite TV dad was Yuppies, Shoulder Pads, Pac-Man, MTV when they actually showed videos, the Super Bowl Shuffle, the original crudely drawn Simpsons, Nancy Reagan sitting on the lap of Mr. T dressed as Santa Claus kissing him on the forehead, and this, which was probably the fuel for everything I just showed you. The Comic Power channel does not endorse drugs. Say no to drugs. And by the way, I'm not making this up. This actually happened. It was the 80s. You had to be there. And 80s movies just love over-the-top portrayals of... Did I mention that the 80s were weird? Remember that infamous scene from the movie Scarface starring Al Pacino in 1983, where he puts his whole face in a big mountain of cocaine? What about the original RoboCop movie from 1987, where the creator of the RoboCop program has 2 women over and snorts off their body? And of course, Miami Vice, what I mentioned earlier, the TV show that ran on NBC from 1984 to 1989. It was shot more like a music video than your standard police procedural. And these 2 cops with expensive suits and a white Ferrari were busting everybody. Down in Colombia, Pablo Escobar was at the height of his power in the 1980s. So in the 80s, it literally was everywhere, especially in pop culture, where it's associated with being cool and power and prestige and excess. So in the 80s, success meant you drove a Lambo, you dated a supermodel, and you snorted. So that's the backdrop to the 1980s, which inspired Steve Englehart to create a character this ridiculous. And since Harley Quinn's animated show was one of the most satirical, dark comedy, ridiculous shows ever, and which actually makes South Park look tame in comparison, so for him to appear in the Harley Quinn show makes complete sense. So I want to recognize the writers and the showrunner for figuring this out. And let's face it, DC can't get live action movies right to save their life, but their animated shows and movies have always been focused and top notch. Maybe they should let the people who were doing the animated shows write the actual live action movies. And what do you know? It's back in pop culture, because this movie, directed by Elizabeth Banks, became a surprise hit in early 2023. Full disclaimer, I do not encourage anyone to use, and kids, stay away from drugs. Drugs are bad. But apparently, this guy didn't get the message. This is real news footage from 2016.
Those are your lucky numbers. Can I tell you what? Do you know your chances of winning?
Slim to none.
Slim to none, you're right. Let me tell you, it's 1 out of 292 million. What do you think about that?
I knew it.
You knew it. Your numbers are lucky, though. Am I right?
I hope so.
Can I ask you, if you won all the money, what would you do with it?
Bunch of hookers and cocaine.
Oh, okay, that's not good. We were hoping for a different answer.
Do with that what you will, but this guy has become a meme. His phrase has inspired pop culture and created a cottage industry of merchandise. He will forever be this guy who said this on live TV. So, with all the ridiculousness out the way, what's going on with season 4 of Harley Quinn anyway? It revolves around her girlfriend Poison Ivy becoming the CEO of the Legion of Doom. And she shows up to work ready to do her job, but the supervillains working under her don't want a female boss.
Lex hired a skirt.
That's dialogue from Snowflame, who's very upset that Lex Luthor hired a skirt, aka a woman, as their leader. And then he complains that by having a female CEO, this somehow debases men. So this version of Snowflame in Harley Quinn the Animated Series Season 4 is not going to be the Don Johnson spoof we got in New 52. We're getting the original Snowflame from the 1980s look. And apparently he's a coke-sniffing, right-wing, misogynist incel, making this a very timely story. The incel community, if you guys got laid, would you stop being obnoxious? This is ridiculous. The 80s were weird, but the 2020s are giving it a run for its money. Okay, that's about it for today. Let me know, what do you think of the Snowflame character? Are you watching Harley Quinn the Animated Series? Be sure to speak up in the comment section. I'm sure you guys have a lot to say about this. I enjoyed creating this video. It was a lot of fun, and I was not on when I made it. While you're here, be sure to check out one of my previous videos called The Top 50 Female Superheroes of All Time. Tell me what you think of my list, who you think is missing, and I encourage my female subscribers to speak up more often. From the comments, you would think it's just a boys club around here, but there's a lot of women who actually subscribe to my channel. I can see the numbers in my analytics. Until next time, this is Comic Killer 72 for Comic Powers saying bye-bye.